What the f*** is that? Whatever we want to talk about, we're going to talk about it. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of E4 Explicit Podcast. I'm Corey, and this is Antony Davies, a professor, and I will let you kind of tell me your background.
I'm an associate professor of economics at Duquesne University and the Milton Friedman Distinguished Scholar at the Foundation for Economic Education.
All right, that's a mouthful. So that's, like you said earlier, it took a long time to get probably all of
Yeah,
those.
it did.
So good. So how long have you been a professor and all that stuff?
Oh, I've been a professor off and on for 20 years. I spent some time straight out of graduate school, went to teach at a small college, left to start a dot-com company at the height of the dot-com era, went back, started a few other companies. So I get bored about every 7 years. It's this itch. I have to go do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So what .com? What was it like? .com what?
Oh, it was the company Parabon Computation. I was one of the first employees there. You may have heard of them. They're the people who currently do this thing where they can take a piece of DNA from a crime scene, run it through their supercomputers, and construct a picture of the person whose DNA it is. Yeah, it's an astounding science fiction type thing.
That's insane.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
That's like you ever watch the show Forensic Files?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Creepy voice, that guy with the creepy voice. Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, so they, one of the first cases they did was out in the West, some unsolved murder. They had DNA from the scene, ran it through Parabon supercomputers, and they get the picture. So they put the picture on the news, and the guy sees it and turns himself in. It's
so
incredible.
It worked. Yeah, you're like,
yeah,
cha-ching.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And you started the system or the
No, I was one of the founding employees. A friend of mine started the company, and I joined him. I was employee number 3.
Wow.
And at the time, the business model was we would take computer time off of PCs that were connected to the internet. So you've got your PC and you're doing word processing.
Sure.
You step away to get a cup of coffee. Your computer's idle. Well, we can take that computation while it's sitting there and bundle it with others, and you got supercomputation. And then we sell it by the slice to people. That was the original business model.
Holy shit.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah. It's like, all right. Wow. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's so cool, though.
Yeah.
So you're out there saving lives, really, and solving murders.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
And you don't do that anymore, obviously.
No. I left that, started a couple of other companies, and then just recently a couple of years ago, started a nonprofit. Cool. My colleague, James Harrigan, and I go around to high schools throughout the country giving one-day seminars on economics and government.
Nice. All right. So there's a couple topics we could talk about. You're definitely a pro in probably all of them, and economics is definitely your thing. So I think maybe we could start with the immigration type, topic of what I remember watching a video that you did. I think it was you at IHS, and it was a cool graph of like how much money immigration brings in and jobs and like all this really cool information. So like I didn't know any of that. I only see what's on the tube, you know what I mean? And that's what you're supposed to believe. So can you kind of give me like a little like information of like, the A, B, and C's of immigration?
Well, there are, of course, pluses and minuses, and the minuses get a lot of press. So let me start with the pluses on immigration. And that is, if we talk about the number of American jobs that immigrants take that would have otherwise gone to Americans, and there's all sorts of discussion you can have on that topic. But if you put that aside for a moment and ask a different question, how many jobs have immigrants created? And there you find an astounding thing. You can name 5 immigrants that founded Sun Microsystems, eBay, Google, and I forget the other 2 big companies that together employ more immigrants than they've created more jobs than there are immigrants who come into the country. Sure. These 5 companies together are worth something like $3 trillion. And that's something that we have now, $3 trillion worth created by just 5 immigrants or children of immigrants. And so it raises the question, well, look, what's the benefit to immigrants? Well, one of the things is, if you think about it, the immigration process requires that you do what? You're leaving your home country where you grew up and your family and your friends are, going to a different country with a different culture, possibly a different language, different mores, all of this stuff. Why? You're going because you're looking to build a better life for yourself and your family. Now, what sorts of attributes are those? Those are the attributes of an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That's exactly the sort of people we want coming into the country. So the immigration process itself is a filtration mechanism. That the people that come through that process, more so than for the average population, are entrepreneurial. And so that, they create jobs. They end up creating more jobs than they occupy.
Damn, I never thought of it like that.
So that's one of the upsides. Another upside, one of the things that you hear is, well, immigrants come in and they don't pay taxes, and the fact is they do pay taxes. There's an interesting thing here. The federal government will issue what's called an ITIN, and I forget what the initials stand for, but the ITIN does the same thing that a Social Security number does, but you issue it to people who, for whatever reason, don't have Social Security numbers. Amongst them, illegal immigrants. And so if I'm an illegal immigrant, I can get an ITIN, and now I'm paying federal taxes, I'm paying Social Security, Medicare taxes. And the interesting thing is, because I'm illegal, although I'm paying into Social Security and Medicare, I can't withdraw from it. I get no benefit. So in a sense, illegal immigrants are net positives to the Social Security and Medicare systems. They contribute, but they don't draw out.
Wow. So they're paying for something that
they'll never get.
They'll never get like we would.
Now, that's on the plus side. On the minus side, you hear things about, you hear some reasonable arguments and some unreasonable arguments. And I think some of the unreasonable arguments are immigrants are taking American jobs. And the fact is the numbers indicate that they're contributing more jobs than they occupy. And even then, the jobs that immigrants, particularly illegal immigrants, tend to occupy are jobs that Americans don't want to occupy in the first place.
Yeah.
So in that sense, they're not taking anything. But some of the more reasonable arguments say things like, well, we've got people coming into this country with different cultures, different mores, and that changes what we have here. And that's correct. It does. But in some sense, to say that we have this American culture and to claim it's monolithic, which it isn't, we're a bunch of little subcultures that happen to be unified by a political boundary. These things evolved precisely because our parents and grandparents were immigrants and came in with their own mores and cultures and so forth. And we all make do. And the way we make do is that the immigrants adopt to an extent the culture that's here in the U.S. And the Americans who are here alter a little bit. And we start to adopt the culture that in part that they brought with them. And so it's this give and a take that ends up making the United States culturally a very interesting place to live.
Yeah, it's like a giant melting pot.
Yeah, very much so.
So Andrew Yang is a 2020 candidate, and I really like him. I'm not saying like I'm voting for him, but I'm saying I liked him because he looks at it as an entrepreneurial, like economic mindset.
Right.
And he has the freedom dividend, he calls it. Every American over 18 gets $1,000 a month. And he says he can get it from all these other places. But his dad was a immigrant that founded a bunch of patents for GE that helped America and that company create all these great things. So what is your take on the universal basic income?
All right, so I'll tell you about the universal basic income, but I think Andrew Yang goes off the rails, and he goes off the rails at a place that people wouldn't expect. And that is at coming at this saying he's a businessman, he understands how these things work, and he can make the government more efficient, we can do things right. And that's always a non-starter. It's a non-starter because our government wasn't designed to be efficient. It was actually designed to be inefficient. And the reason it was designed to be inefficient is so that a majority of the population can't run roughshod over a minority, that it's difficult to get things done, and there has to be a give and a take. That's very unlike what happens in business. So to the extent that someone brings along, all well-meaning, and of course it makes sense that you would want to bring efficiency to government, you actually end up, if you're unsuccessful, or if you're successful, you end up with a worse government because now you've got one that is good at doing what it does.
Yeah.
which is bad news for any minority population. Putting that aside, let's talk about the UBI, Universal Basic Income. The idea here is that everybody pays X percent of their income into a pot, and from this pot, everybody receives a check for the same amount of money. So for example, I'm just going to pick numbers out of the air. You pay 10% of your income. I pay 10% of my income into this pot. If you earn a lot of money, you're paying more because you're paying 10% of a larger number.
Yeah.
I make a little bit of income. I'm paying less, 10% of a smaller number. But we each get a check for $1,000. And the idea is that that check is supposed to cover basic things,
Sure.
right? Now, I think UBI is a good idea and a dangerous idea. It's a good idea if you can replace everything we currently do to help the poor. So think about income assistance, housing subsidies. I would even go so far as to say things like minimum wage, Social Security, Medicare, all of it. Absolutely everything we do to help people, replace it with the UBI. And if you can say rightly so, $1,000 a month isn't enough to make up for that. Well, fine. We'll jack up the numbers then. Let's say $5,000 a month.
Yeah.
Of course, you're going to have to increase the percentage we pay in, but these things work out. The benefit you get from doing this is there are all sorts of odd interactions that occur. You think of it like this. When a physician prescribes drugs to someone who's sick, they have to be very careful if they're prescribing multiple drugs because multiple drugs can interact in ways that they didn't intend,
Sure.
and bad things can happen. The same thing is true for economic policies. So we can say something like, well, we want a policy in place that helps people who don't have much income. We call that income assistance. Or we will have another policy in place that helps people to afford housing. We call this housing subsidies. And these things they're separate programs, but they can interact in ways that cause outcomes that are actually bad, that we didn't intend.
Sure.
It's an interaction. So one of the benefits of a UBI is it takes all those bad interactions off the table because all that stuff is gone. Everybody gets a check for $5,000, period, and off you go. That's the good side of UBI. The downside of UBI is a practical one, and that is there is no way that I can see politically that we would institute a UBI in place of all of these things.
Yeah.
What would happen is if we got to the point that UBI had enough support amongst the voters, politicians would step in and say, well, okay, we'll have UBI, but we won't take away this program or that program. And why are they saying that? Because this program or that program benefits people who vote for the politician,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
And so then you end up with a situation where we have all of the programs we currently have with UBI on top of it. Mm-hmm. And that's worse. In fact, if you do the math, something like that would end up looking like Social Security all over again, the same magnitude.
Sure.
So people may know that the Social Security Board of Trustees itself says that Social Security will be insolvent in the next 10, 15 years. Well, imagine creating another program of that magnitude that's going to be insolvent for all the same reasons Social Security is insolvent, right?
Yeah.
And now you've just doubled your problems.
Yeah. So I've heard that too, where it's like I probably will never even see Social Security, which is, so what would happen? Not that I guess my taxes come out and I pay for Social Security. I'll never see that. What does that mean for like us or me or, you know what I mean? Like the individual.
Right. So we're shifting gears now. We'll talk about Social Security. One of the problem here is when Social Security was first instituted, we had something like, I don't know what the number was, but it was something in the order of 10 or 15 workers for every retiree who was drawing out Social Security.
Interesting.
And over time, that declines because we're having fewer babies, and now you've got more, and we're living longer, so you have more retirees, fewer workers. And the break even is approximately 3 to 1. So 3 workers for every 1 Social Security recipient, and that's sustainable.
Yeah.
Right now, I believe we're at something like 2.2 or 2.5, so we're below the sustainable level. And so what happens, of course, you talk about not getting Social Security. Yeah, you probably won't. I might get something, right? And Social Security Board of Trustees has said things like, well, if you want Social Security to continue, you're going to have to do one or two or a combination of two things. One is increase payroll taxes 20%. The others cut Social Security benefits 20%. And you can imagine neither one of those is...
Well, that's happening.
Nobody wants either one of those things, right? But the alternative is Social Security goes bankrupt, which is where it's headed.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about this is the rate of return on Social Security is abysmal. So if you do the math and you say something like, over the course of my career, I pay in so much in Social Security taxes, and then when I retire, I should draw out, at least under the current rules, a certain amount.
Sure. And
you can do the mathematics and figure out, in effect, what the rate of return is on that. So you think about your Social Security taxes as an investment, and what comes out when you retire, that's the return. Well, the rate of return on Social Security is around 1/3 of 1%. Above inflation.
So nothing.
Yeah, it's basically zero. It's horrible. And there's an interesting subnote here, which is that it's actually worse for minority populations and for men versus women because of differences in longevity. There is, in effect, a 100% death tax on Social Security. You can pay in your whole working career, and at age 65, you retire, and if you die one day later, all the benefits you would have received, gone.
Gone, yeah.
Yeah. So when you realize that, you realize the longer you live, the more you'll pull out.
Sure.
So it turns out, if you do the math, the average black male can expect a rate of return of somewhere around -1%, so 1% below inflation.
Jesus.
Yeah, the average white male, I believe, is at -0.33%. The average white female is like 1.5 or whatever it is. But the numbers are all low. So here's the thing. We can actually put that to our advantage. And you put it to our advantage by doing something like the following. You say to all the young people out there, so you're college age, you're getting ready to enter the workforce, or you just entered the workforce, and we say to you, you're going to pay into Social Security until your age, and you have to do the math, but the number's about age 40, 45. You pay in until you're about, let's say, 45, age 45. And at age 45, from that point forward, you never pay another dime of Social Security taxes. But in return, you don't get any Social Security benefits when you retire. Now, people wig out saying, oh my God, I'm going to get no Social Security benefits. But consider, if you don't have to pay in any Social Security taxes from age 45 onward, that's an extra, whatever it is, 10%, 12%, that you'll get on your paycheck because that was going to Social Security, now it comes to you. You can invest it privately in a IRA or a 401k. And if you're concerned that these things are risky, you can invest it into treasury bills, which are the exact same thing that Social Security invests in. And you'll get a higher rate of return by far.
By far than that.
Yeah. So much so that you're actually better off taking this deal of saying, fine, I'm going to walk away. I'll take no benefits, but don't tax me anymore. And if you enact a plan like that, what you do is you create this moving window of people who are no longer on Social Security. So by the time those currently college-age kids reach age 65, there's nobody left on Social Security.
Yeah.
You phased the whole thing out.
Interesting. And then it wouldn't go bankrupt.
Yeah, well, in that sense, that's correct. You would phase the thing out. It would go bankrupt between now and then, but you can borrow or something because the thing's phasing out, and it's going to become less and less of a problem. But you've gotten rid of the thing at the same time, not harming anybody who would have been involved with the system.
And you're probably benefiting them more than you would if you just let it go.
Yeah. But is that going to happen? No, it's not going to happen. Why? Because, again, politicians, their goal is to get elected. And how do they get elected? By pleasing people. And, what are they going to do? People are going to say, well, no, I don't like this. And
Scary.
So, I'm not going to vote for you, despite the fact that it's a good thing. It's the same phenomenon you would get if you took your 3-year-old to the physician for his checkup, and the physician had the 3-year-old decide for himself what kind of shots or treatments he was going to get. And of course you're going to get bad outcomes.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That's insane. That's so interesting that like all of these things that are potentially good ideas that would benefit everybody as a whole long term are like, no, we don't want to do that. It's because like we're scared and like the politicians and blah blah blah. So like
it's partly that. It's what we call the public choice problem. The beautiful example of the public choice problem is Amtrak. Amtrak has a line that runs from Los Angeles to New Orleans called the Sunset Limited. And the Sunset Limited was inaugurated in 1970. And from 1970 to the present, the Sunset Limited has never turned a profit. It is operated at a loss. that entire time. In fact, the loss is so bad that Amtrak could actually save money by telling its customers, please don't take this train. We'll give you free airline tickets to fly. It would cost Amtrak less to pay to fly its customers than it does to move them by train. And you ask the question, well, this is stupid.
Yeah.
Why does the Sunset Limited persist? It's a public choice problem. The public choice problem is it persists because Congress votes for it to persist. And why does Congress vote for it to persist? Because the Sunset Limited line runs through a tremendous number of congressional districts, throwing off jobs in each one.
Wow.
So every one of those congressional representatives, even though the Sunset Limited is bad for the country, each of those congressional representatives, it's good for them to vote to keep it in existence.
Them.
And so, yes, we have 40 years of ridiculous train. Yeah.
How do they pay for their employees to like?
Oh, well, the government borrows. So you talk about our $22 trillion debt. Part of it is, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so stupid.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So like, but that's just the one line, right? Amtrak makes money, but
it does on some of its lines. Generally, my understanding is the lines in the Northeast Corridor are profitable. Elsewhere, they aren't.
Wow. That's so weird.
Well, it's an interesting thing because one of the things that happens today is that people get very skittish when you talk about profit. And it's a separate conversation, but I think that comes down to a misunderstanding of money. Yeah. But nonetheless, people get skittish when you talk about profit, that they perceive that somehow a company that makes a profit is pulling resources out of the economy somehow. And what happens is when you're making a profit, what's actually happening is that you are providing more value to society than you're asking for in return. So you look at something like the Sunset Limited that's incurring a loss. It's actually wasting resources. It's taking resources that could be used for something else and transforming them into a product that has less value than the resources themselves had.
Got it.
And that difference in value, that's the loss. And so one of the things that we do is we become skeptical of things that make profit. And you'll hear a lot of the candidates now talking about insurance companies. Well, we don't want our money going to these insurance companies. They're making a profit. No, the fact that they're making a profit indicates that they're providing more value to us than they're asking for in return. That's a sign of something good happening. It's not a sign of something bad.
Interesting. So I guess we can take another shift and go to insurance. Is that like I know that's a big thing now with like everybody, wanting free health care and all that other stuff.
Right.
Is that something that you kind of touch on or deal with in economics in your space as far as like how much it would cost for that to happen like they do in Canada? Because, there's you don't pick your provider. It's not as good quality. It's blah, 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 blah.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things we have to keep in mind here is to step away from all of the details and look at the big picture. And the big picture is you can have a private system where you're paying for your health care and you're paying for the insurance infrastructure that makes these things possible. Mm-hmm. Or you can have a government system in which you're paying for your health care, plus you're paying for the government bureaucracy required to manage the thing. And of the two, the government bureaucracy is by far more expensive. So there's no way, absolutely no way, the government can manage a healthcare system and have it and do so at a lower cost than the private sector can. Now, what the government can do is hide the cost. And it hides the cost by doing things like, and you find this in Canada, when you walk into a hospital, it doesn't cost you much. And people point to that and say, see, this is low cost healthcare. Yeah, except you're missing the fact that the Canadian tax rate is, whatever it is, almost twice as much as it is in the U.S. Uh-huh. So they're actually prepaying for their health care. You're not seeing it when you walk in the door because it was taken out of your paycheck over the previous 5 years. The other thing that happens is in systems like this, you start to get a problem of not enough health care being provided. And so that comes out in the wash as wait times. So I want to get, an MRI done and there's a 6-month wait or a 3-month wait or whatever it is. Whereas in the US, I can schedule it and be in the next week.
Yeah.
Now, that's expensive to do it that way, but the reason it's expensive is because that's what it costs. In Canada, when you've got the 3 or 6 month wait or whatever it is, you're in effect paying twice. You're paying in your taxes, and plus you're paying in the delay. So you get a lot of cases of Canadians more wealthy Canadians coming to the U.S.
to get stuff.
to get health care. In fact, it became such a problem that several years ago, Canada was talking about making it illegal for Canadians to come to the U.S. to get
out on money.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because you always hear like the opposite of that. Oh, it's free health care. You walk in, but no, I was thinking. I've always thought there's no way that nothing is ever free.
Right.
Nothing is truly free. If you're paying twice the amount of taxes, you're 100% paying for it. So
right. You're just hiding how you're paying for it. Yeah.
Awesome. Interesting. Because that changes a lot of like, I know me, so I have a pre-existing heart condition. I've had 3 open heart surgeries. Until Obamacare, I was practically uninsurable with most jobs.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'd have to wait like 18 months or whatever it was to get like a plan. Ever since that took in effect, I could start day one, I could be insured.
Yes.
Which was a game changer for me because I like have to go to Children's Hospital every year because I'm kind of a guinea pig. Like they don't know what happens to anyone older than me that's had my procedure. So I like had to have good insurance. And so I was like, oh, well, free insurance would be awesome. But now that you say that, it's like,
yeah, well, one of the benefits of Obamacare was this thing that you've described, that if I have a pre-existing condition, I can go in and I can get insurance.
Yeah.
And this is fine. And there are a number of problematic footnotes there. But one interesting thing to ask is, how did we get to the point where this pre-existing condition thing becomes a problem? And we got to this point in part, and it's only in part, but it's a big part, in part because we tied health insurance to jobs. Which is weird because, your employer doesn't provide your car insurance. He doesn't provide your house insurance.
That's
but
true.
He provides your health insurance. And why is that?
Yeah, why?
It's that because back in the 1930s, 1940s, we were having a problem with wages rising. And the government imposed a price limit on wages. Said wages cannot rise above a certain point. It was to help control inflation. And what happened? Well, I'm a business owner and I want to hire some guys who are talented and they've got jobs already. I can't offer them more money because we're already at the cap.
Yeah.
What I can do is offer to pay their health insurance because that doesn't count as their wages.
What?
And so I say, come work for me. I'm going to pay you the same amount you're getting there, but I'll pay your health insurance also. So what happened was the health insurance became part of the job because it was how the market got around this wage control that the government had put in place.
What?
And so we have this thing now. Now, of course, we don't have the wage controls anymore, but over time what's happened is that Congress has given special tax treatment to employer-provided health care. You get to pay for it in pre-tax dollars. And because of that, it's cheaper for you and it's cheaper for your employer to provide the health insurance than it would be for you to go out on the open market.
Yeah.
Not because of the market, but because of how Congress has taxed the thing.
What?
So that comes to this pre-existing condition problem. And the pre-existing condition problem in part comes about from the fact that when you change jobs, you have to change insurance because your insurance is tied to your job.
Yeah.
And the new insurance company is going to say, well, you got this pre-existing condition. I'm not going to cover this thing. And now we've got the problem of, how do I get coverage for this problem that I have? And what you see is it's a cascade effect of the government stepping in and for good intentions, doing something that economically isn't smart. The market reacts. The government reacts to that. The market reacts. And before you know it, you've got a problem and people are pointing to the market as the source of the problem when in fact it was the sequence of government interventions that caused the problem in the first place.
So you're not, so you're obviously, you're kind of going back and forth with like big government and like small government. Like, are you kind of, where do you stand if you want, we're not talking about it, but like kind of like them interfering with certain things and maybe not interfering with certain things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I tell people I'm neither for big government or for small government. I'm for right government.
Okay.
And the right-sized government, in my opinion, is a government that prevents people from harming each other. And that includes not just preventing me from beating on you or vice versa, but also prevents me from dumping waste onto your yard or into the air. That's also harming other people.
Sure.
So a government that prevents people from harming each other, but otherwise leaves them alone. So that's a government that would have, we'd have environmental laws, certainly. We'd have tort laws. We would the government would be enforcing contracts. We would have police to prevent theft, but you wouldn't have things like a minimum wage or things like drug laws, where the government is stepping in to two people who are otherwise coming to some agreement between themselves.
Yeah.
It doesn't involve anybody else. And the government's saying, no, you cannot make this agreement.
Yeah.
We're going to set rules for this. That's a problem.
So like what if you don't have those, like the marijuana thing, how that was like the war on drugs was like this major thing.
Yeah.
And now it's legal. So it's
Right,
like,
yeah.
So you're saying that, so what would be in place for that? Like instead, like we would just do our thing and like.
Yeah, we just do our thing.
Okay.
It probably to sidestep drugs a little bit. Think about the FDA. And the FDA currently will prohibit you from buying drugs the medicinal drugs that the FDA has not approved.
Sure.
Well, there are a lot of drugs out there that haven't been approved by the FDA, but they show promise. And particularly someone who's terminal, is going to want to try these drugs.
Of course,
and,
yeah.
The FDA says no. Now, that's bad government, because you've got a person, the sick person, and you've got one party, the sick person, the other party, the pharmaceutical company, and they're willing to come together to transact business, and the government is stepping in and saying no. Now, an appropriate role for government here would be an FDA that doesn't prohibit the drugs, but rather requires some stamp that says this drug has been FDA approved, or alternatively, warning, this drug has not been FDA approved. It might kill you and it might do it painfully.
Yeah, but it's on you.
But it's on you to decide whether you want to go
Okay.
with this or not.
Yeah, I like that because
That's right government.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I'm not a fan of like I like the government, but you made a good point earlier when you said like it seems like you think that the government kind of has like the right intentions, but like economically sometimes makes like stupid choices, whatever party, doesn't matter, but like, and then that eventually affects us throughout history. Like I never knew about like the Social Security thing and like the health insurance for jobs. I've always wondered, why is my job responsible
Right, yeah.
for my life
Yeah.
and like my health care and all that
It dates
stuff?
back to the early 1900s and wage controls.
But that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Like and what if we got rid of that now? What would happen? Like if jobs were like, we're not going to cover your health insurance, would we just make more money since we don't have those regulations anymore on pay and stuff, or what?
Yeah, in part you'd be earning more money, but in part you'd be spending more because now you're going to be responsible for the health insurance itself. I think at the end, the great benefit is less in terms of how much I'm spending than it is in a reduction of the inefficiencies. So we waste a tremendous amount of resources forcing our system from worker to employer to insurance to hospitals to be compliant with the rules that the government has put in. And so you can look at, over time, the number of people that hospitals employ who have nothing to do with patients. All they have to do with is making the hospital compliant with government, and that increases while the number of people who actually care for patients is
nurses and doctors.
just rises with population. You find the same thing with higher education, teachers versus administrators. And so one of the things that such a plan would do would be to eliminate all of that. Because there's no longer, would you still have administrators? Certainly, because there are things, you want to be careful that your insurance covers appropriate things and it's being used, not abused, this kind of thing. So you're going to have administrators, but you don't have to have this huge cadre of administrators who have to basically, their only job is to interface with government.
Yeah. No, my mom is, she works for a big Atlantic General out in on the Eastern Shore, and she runs like the billing department.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a story she tells me of like just the annoying part of her job. There's like an entire department of just nothing but people dealing with claims and insurance and all this other stuff, when like like you said, there's way more of those people than there are like doctors and nurses and stuff.
Yeah. Now you start the conversation by saying that government has, or we'll say politicians, bureaucrats have good intentions, and the intentions run afoul. We see an example of that right now with this call to make college free. And the problem here, and it's the same problem I submit that happens every time we have politicians talk about whatever it is, be it college or healthcare or Social Security or whatever. The problem is that they will focus on their intentions, and in doing so, only show you half of the picture.
Okay, yeah.
And so the half of the picture that they're showing us now is your kids will be able to go to college and it won't cost you anything.
Not like Harvard, but like public colleges,
yeah.
right? Okay,
Public colleges.
Got it.
And okay, that's fine, and it sounds really good. In fact, it polls very well. When average Americans are asked, "How do you feel about this?" they say, "Thumbs up. This is a great
Sounds
idea."
Great. Yeah.
But interestingly, I believe it was Pew, if not Gallup, did a series of studies on this. They asked this question to the average voter: "What do you think about free college?" And they say, "Thumbs up. Great idea."
Sure.
And then they rephrase it and they say, "Well, what about free college in exchange for your taxes going up X%?" And there, the support for the thing dropped precipitously.
Yeah.
Because that's the full picture. You can't give anything without there being some cost on the other side.
Of course.
And part of the problem with intentions is we focus on them. And we say things like, there are a lot of poor people who can't afford to go to college. We need to fix that. In fact, college is too expensive for almost everybody. We need to fix it for everyone. And when you look at the intention, it looks well and good and noble. But when you look at the other side and say, yeah, but it's going to come at a cost. And the cost is everybody's going to have to pay, 10% more taxes.
Yeah.
And now you see, the single mother trying to raise kids and just barely getting by. She can't afford to pay another 10%. No. And if you ask her, she would say, yeah, free college sounds like a good idea, but not at that price.
Yep.
I'd rather do something else. And there you see the full picture. And one of the ways to get around this problem of falling into the trap of good intentions is to make sure that we show the whole picture. What are the benefits and what are the costs?
Yeah, no, I actually have two questions about that. So my first question is, I think it's New York. Is it DC too? There's a couple states that are doing the free public colleges, right?
Right.
And I'm like, that sounds great. That's awesome. Because when I lived in New York, my girlfriend was like, hey, I might do this, whatever. And I kind of like looked into it. So if you do it, first off, you have to qualify. Mm-hmm. And then you do your 4-year degree, but you basically have to sign a contract saying you will not leave the state for an additional 4 to 6 years after you graduate, which would obviously make that state's, the economy work better for them because they would provide the education, but then you would stay here to get a job, and then it would just like recycle itself. Right. Makes sense. But it's like, all right, well, if I want to go to school in North Carolina at Duke, but I don't want to live in at Duke, so it kind of, I was like, it's kind of like a trap. Like you're basically going to invest like 10 years of your life, if not longer, just to get free schooling. So it was like, I don't know why they did that or structured that way, or if that was like kind of like they're testing it and to see if like the free public space would work. But so what are your thoughts on that? But also, I'm not a fan of higher education.
Personally. Oh, I agree. Neither am I. And I teach in it.
That's amazing. All right, good. I thought you were going to say the opposite because, for instance, if you're a doctor or a lawyer, that's one thing. But for me, I went to school for film. I should have never went.
Yes.
Because everything I learned, I either did or I could have learned on YouTube. The only thing I got from my education was the people that I met in school, and I work with them now professionally. Okay.
And you only met them because they were there also,
exactly.
And they didn't need to be.
100%. So I think, what are your thoughts of actually going to school?
Yeah. So if you go back to the 1970s, 25% of 18 to 24-year-olds were enrolled in higher education. Today, it's 50%. Now, you can't tell me that our 18 to 24-year-olds are twice as smart as they were in the 1970s.
No.
What's going on is we're pushing people into college who don't belong there. And it's not because they're dumb. It's because college is designed to give you an education in which you think about things, as opposed to an education in which you're doing things. And if your goal is to do things, you don't need a college education. You need technical training. And somehow in this country, and Europe avoided this, and I don't know how they did it, but in this country, we've come to denigrate technical training as being somehow you're a second-class citizen.
100%. Yeah.
When in fact, I'll give you a good example. Of course, I'm an academic. My parents and my wife's parents are all academics, her brothers and sisters. It's an entire family of academics, right? Including 5 of my 6 children. Number 6 says, heck with that, I want to be an automotive engineer. And I said, thumbs up, dude. Go for it.
Yeah.
Because that's where his interests lie.
Skill set, all that stuff.
He can go get a degree in accounting and probably end up earning less than he would as a good automotive engineer and not enjoy it.
Yeah, and be miserable. That's my thing. Yeah, it's like you pay. I mean, I paid for 3 years, and I went to I went to the Art Institute first off. So joke, scam. They got sued by the government. They were non-profit or they were for profit. Now they have to be non-profit. And it's like, it's not like I went to like USC or like a school that like might have gotten me like in a room with Steven Spielberg. You know what I mean? I went to like some bogus school, and like so just the educational system in general, I think, is kind of like not helping or working to help people in general, right? What would you say, like, kind of?
Yeah, I think that's true, and part of it comes from how we pay for college. And this idea of making college free actually is going to make that whole situation worse, because what happens is colleges and universities have no skin in the game when it comes to your eventual employment. So you come to the school and you pay them X tens of thousands of dollars, and if you get out, if you graduate with a degree that has no market value, that doesn't cost the university anything.
Nothing.
You're done. On your own.
We're done with you.
Money.
Yeah.
An interesting way to do this would be to require that the universities and colleges, which have tremendous endowments, use the endowments to fund loans to the students. So the colleges and universities would loan directly to the students. So if you can't get a job to repay your loan, the college or university is out the money.
So they make sure you have a job.
All of a sudden, they become hyper-focused on admitting people who are going to do well, and while you're there, that you study things that have serious market value.
Yeah.
And making college, quote-unquote, free actually goes in the opposite direction, because what it does is it removes from both the student and the college any negative repercustions of making bad choices.
Sure.
You could go, you study basket weaving, you can't get a job. Well, that's okay. The taxpayer is going to take care of that for you. Yeah.
That's so smart, because like what you just said about the job department or the job finding department, whatever you want to call it, recruiting or whatever, in most colleges are a joke. Like I remember at Art Institute, when it comes time for them to look for a job for you, they're finding like, oh, we got you a wedding gig, or we got you. I'm like, why aren't you finding me jobs at like ESPN, or like, why am I not recording a documentary for Nat Geo right now? You know what I mean?
Right.
They're not finding legit jobs that require. I have so many friends that went to school at like University of Maryland for like all these amazing degrees, and they're like bartending, or they're like selling insurance, or they're doing something that has nothing to do with what they went to school for.
Yeah. One of the things that I say repeatedly to high school students is that a college degree isn't valuable. A college major is. And the value ranges dramatically. At the top is petroleum engineering. The average student with a 4-year, so forget about graduate school, the average student with a 4-year degree in petroleum engineering can expect to earn almost $6 million over the course of a 40-year career, over and above what he paid, what cost him for the college education. So no question, petroleum engineering, it's worth it. Go for it. On the other end of the spectrum, you get things like early childhood development, whose value is negative $500,000. That is, early childhood development, when you're done with that degree, you're actually worth less on the market than you were with your high school diploma.
Wow.
Yeah. And you get this gamut of things in between. So when people start talking about the importance of the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, they're all up at the top end, worth $2, $3, $4 million over and above the cost of the education.
Wow.
Things, when you get into the liberal arts, that's worth much less. The fine arts, less. When you get into things, basically any major that ends in the word studies is at the bottom of the pile.
Wow.
It's almost not worth it your time to go get the degree.
That makes so much sense.
Let me put a big footnote here, because people are going to wig out saying, well, I'm going to college for more than a job. I'm going to improve myself and all of this. And that's fine. But if you're going to improve yourself, that's on you. If we're talking about the government funding college education, what matters isn't the benefit to you. What matters is the benefit of your education to others.
Got it.
And that's reflected in the wage rate. The wage that you can get with your degree is a direct measure of the value of that degree to the rest of society. And so if after you've paid the tuition, you can't afford to pay back your loans, well, that's an indication that society doesn't need any more people who have that degree.
Yep.
Not to say it's not valuable, but to say that we've got enough of people who are already willing and able to do this thing. We don't need more.
Yeah. So basically find something that is of need and go do that, basically.
Yeah. And notice the focus here, because again, people wig out when you talk about, well, you're focused on making a profit from your education. But that's what profit is. It's a sign that you have provided value to somebody else. And so this whole conversation about what's my degree worth on the market, it's other-centered. It's a question of what can I do for others? How much do others value what I'm doing, as opposed to a self-centered of, do I want this and it's going to make me a better person?
Yeah. No, that actually totally makes sense. And I agree with you. I think when people see a company or whoever thinking like about a profit, it's okay to make $1 off of what you're providing, especially if it's a good service and people are getting benefit from it. So that's so funny that that like being like owning a business and dealing with that stuff, I kind of catch myself sometimes almost not feeling bad, but like I don't want to like make too much or do too well because I don't want people to think like, oh, he's in it for the money. It's like, no, it's like, but now that what you're saying totally makes sense. It's like, yes, I can make money and make a good amount of money doing it, but if I'm benefiting hundreds or thousands of people at the same time, what's so bad about that?
Right. Yeah, and if you're making money at it, it's precisely because you're benefiting all those people. They like what you're doing so much, they are willingly handing you their money for you to do more of it.
I know we talked about it in the beginning, but I want to kind of get back to like immigration and kind of your opinion on like obviously we talked about the positives of immigration, but like are there any like major negatives to immigration as far as like whether it's Europeans or south of the border or Canadians, whatever, like what are like the negative aspects of accepting immigration as like a thing?
Yeah, I would imagine that you can make a good argument that one of the negatives is if you're just going to throw your borders open and let anybody come in, you're going to get a decent number of people coming in who are violent, who are criminals, who are bringing in contraband, this kind of a thing, and certainly that's a problem. Now, to go to the other extreme and say, okay, we're going to basically shut the border, we're going to build a wall, and yes, we have legal ways that you can immigrate, but the hoops are gargantuan for legal immigration, such that, when it comes to someone who is of lesser means, it might as well be shutting the door that we're not allowing anybody in. Yeah. And so all of a sudden, you're faced with this question of, am I willing to risk letting a few bad apples in exchange for all these other wonderful people? Or do I want to shut everybody out in exchange for just keeping those? Or alternatively, is there a way that we can filter people so we make it much, much easier to come into the country? But we have the means in place to identify people who we don't want in, who are criminals or what have you. Now, one of the things that people point to is the drug war. We have drugs coming across the border, but part of that is we talked earlier about the government coming to the rescue to solve problems that the government created. Yeah, and this is one of them. In outlawing drugs the way we have and criminalizing them the way that we have created the conditions for drug monopolies. We call them cartels, the drug cartels. Yeah. It's incredibly profitable to sell drugs, if I'm a Mexican drug cartel, to sell drugs to Americans. Yep. And so I have a tremendous profit incentive to figure out how to do that, regardless of whatever immigration rules you put in place. And one of the ways around that is to say, okay, we're going to decriminalize all of it. That's not to say that we're not going to be concerned about people who are getting addicted to certain drugs, but rather we're not going to treat them as criminals. There's all the SWAT teams that we send out, all that goes away. What happens all of a sudden is the cartel, the monopoly status that these people have had disappears. It disappears because anybody can now, I can go into business growing drugs and selling them. Yeah. And consequently, when the monopoly disappears, you'll have the same thing that you saw in this country with alcohol. With the Prohibition. Whatever amendment it was that made alcohol illegal, all of a sudden we had alcohol cartels pop up. Mm-hmm. Why? Because in effect, in making it illegal, you have created a monopoly. And it's very profitable to provide the thing. Yep. And once we repealed whatever amendment it was, now alcohol is legal, all that disappears. Yeah. No,
I totally agree with you, and I think so. I actually, you know, the fentanyl, that drug.
Yes, yes.
So we've had a huge spike in that, and I was watching Joe Rogan, of course, and he had a ex federale like cop who like was like in it on there, and he was talking about the reason why we've had such a high percentage rates of fentanyl was because majority of the U.S. made marijuana legal. So that cut into the cartel's profits.
Yeah.
So they had to say, okay, well, what else can we do to make more money? So they went that way. So I think you're right, because if we made everything like Holland or whatever, like has everything pretty much decriminalized, you would have to almost do everything, because they'll find a way or something to sell and boost that up to make a profit. Like,
Right.
So like, how would they, how would you have to just make everything basically decriminalized and legal?
Yeah, you decriminalize all of it. Now, going back to my idea of right government, you would have laws in place that say, look, if you're selling this drug and it's tainted and kills people, yeah, that's a problem. You've imposed a harm on somebody.
Sure.
But apart from that, you let people do what they want. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be concerned about drug addiction. Certainly we should. But it is to acknowledge the fact that I don't believe drug addiction would be any worse. In fact, it might even be better if the whole thing were legalized versus illegal.
I agree. I think you're totally right, because it's like almost with the alcohol thing. I know before 21, I was like, oh, I can't wait to be 21. I'll be able to drink legally, blah, blah, blah. Because I never drink when I'm under 21, right?
Right. Yeah.
Hey, Mom.
Yeah. How about those laws?
Yeah, no, I gave it up in a previous podcast, so I'm out. But then when I turned 21, I was like, okay, like I didn't even care. Yeah, I went to a bar and got like a shot or whatever. But it didn't matter to me. So I think if it's like legal, you're not gonna have that like, oh, I need to have this like that feeling or whatever of like just doing it to do it versus like, because I'm sick or whatever other reasons. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that confusing?
I guess somewhere along the line, there's this idea that if we make something legal, everybody's going to do it. Which is weird.
Yeah, I don't think that's true at all. I'm saying I agree with you. I don't think that's like it's just proven that like that's not going to happen.
Right.
I think you're right. It would probably make it even easier, like less addiction. And then I think like, is it Holland? Or is it?
I think it is.
Heroin's legal, everything's legal, and they don't like. If you get into if you have a certain a lot of amount of it, or you OD or something happens, they don't throw you in jail. They take you to a rehabilitation center, and actually, and their numbers are insane of people getting off of the drugs and stuff because they have that system and that support system, and they're not like. They don't throw the book at them for a gram of weed.
You've stumbled upon an important point, which is that I would argue the addiction in many cases, if not most cases, the addiction is going to be there regardless. If I have an addictive personality, whether it's legal or illegal, I'm going to find it and I'm going to get addicted to it. Yep. But when we make it illegal, we throw on top of the addiction problem an additional problem, which is all of the legal nonsense that you've got to deal with. Let's talk for a moment about MMT, modern monetary theory. We had a number of candidates talking about this early on, and then it dropped out, and it's starting to come back again. And it's this idea that the government can print money to pay its bills. Modern monetary theory.
So what's it called? What's the Federal Reserve? That's not even a government establishment.
Well, yeah, technically it's not the government. It's one of these things that on paper it's not the government. In practice, it's kind of the government. Okay. Depends on how hard the government pushes, right? This kind of thing. But the Federal Reserve is a private company, but it was created by Congress and it's directed by Congress. Well, I should say directed by Congress. It was established by Congress, and Congress can unestablish it anytime it wants.
Okay. But as far as printing money, that's the institution.
Yeah, that's the entity that does the printing of the money. Yep. And somehow thankfully I'm hearing less of it over the past couple of months, but I expect it to come back as the election heats up. This idea that we can pay our bill, the government can pay its bills by simply printing money. And what happens at the end is people do a lot of mental machinations to hide the fact that you can't make goods and services appear out of thin air.
No.
ultimately, what matters isn't the amount of money that's around. What matters is that you have a smartphone and I have a smartphone. We have cars, we have houses, we have food. The goods and services we have is what matters. And printing dollars doesn't give us more goods and services. All it does is it dilutes the value of the dollars. So each dollar becomes worth less. In the end, all that printing money does, in effect, is to impose a tax on savers. So if you've got $1,000 in the bank and the Federal Reserve starts printing some money, that $1,000 buys less than it did before because prices rise. So what's really happened is we've stolen some of your purchasing power by printing this money.
So like, because it takes, how much does it cost to make a penny?
More than a penny. I don't know what is right. Yeah.
And it's so like, I think like Yang, was like talking about getting rid of the penny, but like, is that kind of like similar to what you're talking about as far as like devaluing the actual dollar in our purchasing power by printing money?
Yeah, it's a little bit different because when they get rid of the penny, they would replace it with something else, right? So what I'm saying is you'd have the same total dollar amount of coins. It just would be no pennies. You'd have more nickels and dimes or something like that.
Okay.
But here you're actually increasing the total number of dollars in the economy.
That's so interesting. So
and that leads into another topic that's worth talking about, and that's inequality.
Yes.
And people get bent out of shape about inequality, and I think in many instances they make this same error that we're bumping up against with modern monetary theory, and that is they focus on the dollars. And if you've got a big pile of dollars and I have a small pile of dollars, that's a problem. So I ask my students, how many of you have $1 billion? Of course, there's no hands.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
They're college students.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, if you do the numbers, you need something like 500,000 people in front of you to expect just one of them to put their hand up when you say who has $1 billion, right?
Wow.
But so if you look at the dollars, there's lots of inequality. There's a few people who have lots of dollars and lots of people who don't have many dollars. Sure. But if you ask how many of you have smartphones, every single hand in the room goes up.
Yep.
How many of you have cars or your parents have cars, you have access to a car? Every hand goes up. Are there exceptions? Certainly there are exceptions. But the vast, vast majority all have these goods and services. And if you look at the distribution of goods and services, what you find is much more equality. Everybody's got, maybe your car is better than mine, or maybe your house is better than mine, but you have a car. And I have a car, and they both get us from point A to point B. You have a house, I have a house. It keeps the rain out, right? Keeps me warm.
Yep.
In that sense, we're all extremely, extremely equal. And so when we talk about inequality, we focus on these dollars. And what's happening is we're misunderstanding what dollars are. The analogy I give is, let's suppose that we live in a community, and there are no dollars. You do stuff. You grow food or whatever.
Sure. You
build houses, and I do stuff. I paint houses and I fix cars and stuff like that. And maybe it's the case that the stuff I do you value tremendously. Maybe because I'm really good at it, or maybe there aren't many people who do that kind of thing. For whatever reason, you place a high value on the stuff that I do. Mm-hmm. And maybe conversely, you don't place much of a value on the stuff that you do. So you build houses, and there's so many materials around. You can build houses very easily. You got a bunch of people who help you out. It's not a big deal. And so you don't place a high value on stuff that you make.
Yep.
And what happens in this society, we trade. I do the stuff I do for you. You do the stuff you do for me. Now, if we live in a society in which the value of the stuff that I do is tremendous, and the value of the stuff I ask for in return isn't that high, you'd point to me and say, that's the kind of guy I want as my next door neighbor. He provides more value to the rest of society than he asks for in return.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but if you impose on that scenario a monetary system, what happens is you give me lots of dollars because you highly value what I give you, and you don't ask for many dollars in return because the stuff you're giving me you don't place a high value on. And so I accumulate a pile of dollars.
And I get nothing, basically.
Well, you're getting the goods and services. If you have less of a pile of dollars, I have a larger pile of dollars. But what is this pile of dollars? It's a bunch of IOUs. It says that you owe me more stuff that I'm not consuming because you valued the stuff I gave you more than you valued the stuff you gave me in return.
That makes sense.
So when you look at the pile of dollars, we say, well, this guy needs to give back to society. No, the pile of dollars is an indication that society actually owes him more stuff than he's currently consuming.
Wow. Well, it's kind of like what you said earlier about like the oh my God, about the value of
it goes back to the value of what it is you're producing.
Exactly.
So I think, not to say that all inequality discussions are flawed, but I think a lot of them are flawed when they start immediately focusing on the dollars.
Dollar amount. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah. So what you're saying is kind of like, okay, yeah, you might have a mansion, I might have a trailer, but in reality, neither one of us are living on the street.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So we're technically equal, but you're just saying don't look at it as like a monetarily thing. Like it's not. That's where it could
look at the goods and services. Yeah.
Got it. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
That'd probably be a much easier conversation versus like, well, you're a millionaire and and I'm not, so you're a piece of shit or whatever, like. Now, do you mean inequality as far as like women in the workforce?
No, I mean income inequality.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So let's clarify like.
Yeah. Thank you. That's important.
Yeah.
My colleague James Harrigan, who's a political philosopher, does the same thing. He always gets on to me when I say inequality. He said, "What do you mean by inequality?"
What do you mean?
Right, but being an economist, when I say inequality, of course I mean income inequality.
Yeah,
that's what we talk about.
People hear it, they're gonna be like, "What do you mean? What about women?"
Right,
or whatever. So like, let's clarify a little bit about like you're just literally talking about economics. You're not talking
that's correct. No, I'm not talking about anything social.
Talk about gun control.
Talk about guns, right?
Talk about guns. We're in the middle of Virginia, right?
That's right. Yeah. Virginia's pretty gun friendly.
Yeah.
My colleague James Harrigan and I write an op-ed a month for papers throughout the country, and we make it a point to avoid talking about guns anytime we're close to some national gun tragedy.
Sure.
Because people are driving by emotion rather than logic.
Yep.
But it's worth thinking about a little bit. One of the things that people are largely unaware of is the CDC commissioned a study just a few years ago, and by a few I mean maybe 5 years ago, asking the question, how much defensive gun use is there? In other words, in how many instances per year does somebody use a gun to prevent what would either be violence upon them or even their death, right? And as you can imagine, the numbers are very hard to come by. So you get this range, a huge range, from something on the order of 50,000 a year up to 1 million a year, something like that. But what's noteworthy is in this study that the CDC commissioned looks at a whole bunch of studies by people who have looked at this thing.
Yeah.
And it shows all the range of numbers. At the low end, in the worst case scenario, the number of defensive gun uses in this country equals the number of offensive uses, which indicates that if we could wave a magic wand and get rid of all the guns tomorrow, the people who are going to use guns illegally are going to find them anyway.
Yes.
And all you've done is you've disarmed the people who would defend themselves. So at the end, you're no better off than you were before. That's in the worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, the number of defensive gun uses far outweighs to like 10 times the number of offensive uses. Now, one of the things that people will point to is compare the United States to other countries and number of guns and number of gun fatalities. And you have to be very careful about these numbers. Firstly, if the numbers aren't on a per capita basis, they have no meaning.
Sure.
So, for example, yes, we have a lot of gun deaths in this country compared to, pick some other country, the UK. Okay, but we have a much larger population than the UK, so you would expect.
Of course.
So you have to look at the thing on a per capita basis. The other thing that you have to be very careful of is what matters isn't mass shootings. That is, it doesn't matter that 5 people were killed at once. If 5 people were killed, whether they were killed at once or in different places or over the course of a week, what I care is that 5 people were killed.
Yeah.
So mass shootings as opposed to shootings doesn't matter that much. More than that, firearm deaths compared to deaths, in my opinion, don't matter that much. What I really care about is how many times has somebody killed somebody else? That's what bothers me, period. Yep. I don't care whether you used a gun or a knife or a shoe.
Sure.
If you killed somebody, that's a problem.
Yep.
Now, if you look at the numbers for the United States, number of intentional homicides per capita, compared to the amount of guns we have, and you do that for all the countries, what you find is the United States is not an outlier all of a sudden.
Yeah.
it's
because the amount of guns that we do
right.
have.
We have a tremendous number
over
of guns.
400 million, yeah.
But the number of intentional homicides per capita is not out of the ordinary.
Yes, that makes total sense, actually.
And that's not to say, again, it's not to say that the homicides don't matter. It is to say that if you really care about stopping people from killing other people, as opposed to using the killings as an excuse to confiscate guns. If you really care about people killing people, then you should be looking at intentional homicides, and you should be asking the question, well, if they aren't correlated with gun ownership,
sure,
what are they correlated with? And go after that thing.
No, you're right. I had this conversation. Well, it wasn't a conversation. It was and I totally agree with you, because I think it's like, you think about, if you did take all the guns away, when's the last time you saw someone like in a gang or a gangbanger go to a gun store, buy a gun that they know they're going to go commit a murder with? Probably never. So all of they're going to, if somebody wants to do harm to someone, they're going to find a way, whether it's a car, a knife.
Oh, sure.
It doesn't matter. So I had a friend of mine make a post on Facebook, and I never comment on stuff, because I don't like to go back and forth. And it was like, America has a problem with white terrorists, or white domestic terrorism, and I'm like, okay, well, so factually, I just didn't think that was accurate, because the vast majority of mass shooters, especially in 2019, are not all white, because mass shootings, I think they clarify or define it as like 3 or more casualties in a public place, not including the perpetrator.
Yeah, it depends. There's several definitions, but I think the FBI definition is 3 or maybe 4.
Yeah, it's like 3 or 4. So it just like, it really kind of was like, well, my main goal was to like, we don't do this like race thing or whatever. It's like, if someone killed someone,
that's a problem.
Exactly. Right. Regardless of who did it, how they did it, whatever. And then so a female chimed in, and I didn't know who she was. And then she started dropping words like neo-Nazi and my white privilege and all these things. And I was like, let me think about it. Because I could totally drop some facts and knowledge on her, but I didn't want to go back and forth. So I instead extended to come on my podcast, and was like, you don't know my background. You don't know my history. You're just seeing my profile picture.
Right.
Have no clue what I've been through or anything. So anyway, so my point though is, it's not the guns per se, but like, I think social media has a major play in how we have this conversation. Because it's you say mass shootings and you just, everyone goes up in arms. It's like they're making it sound like, oh, it happens, it's more frequent than ever, and we act like no one's ever been murdered by guns before. Like,
and here it's interesting to look at the numbers, because what people say, we have an epidemic of gun violence.
Yes.
We don't have an epidemic of gun violence. We have an epidemic of the reporting of gun violence.
Yes.
And you see it on the news, and of course you see it on the news, because what are they doing? Their goal is to sell eyeballs. They want to sell advertising if they can get you to watch the thing.
Yep.
So they're going to repeat all the bad news. What you don't see is the good news. Good news doesn't sell.
Of course not.
But if you step back and look at the numbers, and you can find this from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the number of homicides, firearm homicides, so forget about homicides, this is homicide by gun, in the U.S. is down 50%, 50% since the 1990s.
Yeah.
And further, the number of crimes committed with a gun, whether the person's killed or not, that's down 80%.
Yes.
So the gun crimes and gun violence are declining precipitously in this country. Are there exceptions? Sure, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, it's declining. And one of the problems we have, I think we have 2 problems. One problem is, I blame on the media, not just the social media, but the mainstream media,
100%.
of refusing to speak clearly. So the media will say things like, we should ban assault weapons. Well, assault weapon has no definition.
Yeah.
So what you get immediately is 2 sides. The control people think that the pro-gun people are just splitting hairs, because we say, well, assault weapon, what does this mean? It's cosmetic, this and that. And so the pro-control people think that the pro-gun people are trying to obfuscate by not engaging. We're going to split hairs on definitions. But conversely, the pro-gun people think that the pro-control people want to ban everything.
Yes.
Because they're using terms that have no clear definition.
That are so broad.
And therefore, could be applied to anything.
Exactly. That makes sense.
And so I think the first step to having a fruitful conversation in this country about gun control is let's all pledge to get the terms right. So semi-automatic has a particular meaning. Assault weapon doesn't have any meaning. There is an assault rifle that does have a meaning, right?
Yes.
So it takes a little bit of time, but I think with 10 minutes with Google, we can figure this out.
Yeah.
And so we can use the right terms and have a conversation. And I think the next step, once we can now communicate clearly, is that each side has to give the other the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
That just because you like guns and I don't, it doesn't mean you're evil. It doesn't mean I'm evil.
Yeah.
It means we're concerned about something. And I think we can find middle ground. And one of the interesting places to find some middle ground, I think, is in the combination of mental illness and guns. I think probably everybody could agree that someone with a mental illness shouldn't own a gun. Is that a Second Amendment violation? Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. But we violate all sorts, and the Supreme Court upholds violations of all sorts of rights under certain circumstances.
To protect the public.
Under certain circumstances, now, that's fraught with all kinds of difficulties of how do we define mental illness, who does the defining. But notice what happens if we can first agree on the terminology so that we can communicate.
Yeah.
And second, assume goodwill on each other's parts. We can now, for the first time, start to have this conversation. And is it going to be easy to figure out how do we keep hands out of the mentally ill? No, it's not. No. But at least we've got the groundwork that we can begin to try and work in that direction.
No, you're right on the head, because two things. One that I've seen as far as the argument or the conversation that people try to have is, as a pro-gun person, I think that it's very much like the terminology is totally off. And then I don't think that more regulation or whatever means complete confiscation. I don't believe that.
Right.
But a lot of people that are pro-gun think that because, like you just said, the terminology is completely off.
It's too broad. Yeah.
It's way too broad.
Yeah.
So they think they just want to pull in Australia and do a whole, mandatory buyback. But I don't think that's the case either. And then, as far as you hit it right on the dot too, the gun homicide or the gun violence and the homicides are the numbers you should look at, because most people that have an argument that are anti-gun talk about gun violence in general, or whatever. Right. And it's like, or no, not gun violence, just gun deaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which
Majority
includes suicide.
Are suicide.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's my point. Is like you got to get your facts like make sure we're all talking about the same thing at the same time.
And this is important to underline. The suicides, I believe, are somewhere around 2/3 to 3/4 of all of gun deaths.
Yes, it's like 70-some%.
Yeah,
it's
the
insane.
vast majority of gun deaths are people killing themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. So whether that's a part of the mental illness, why should they? That's irrelevant. But that's my point. Is the majority of we need to specifically talk about one thing, and that's gun homicide, gun violence on someone else.
Right.
Not myself, because that is a huge amount of people when it comes to suicide. That's actually perfectly. I wish everyone could kind of have that conversation. And I'm not excited because whether you're pro-gun, I'm pro. Mm-hmm. It's not even like that. It's terminology has to be on point, because you're right. If you're talking about an assault ban or assault rifle, it's what gun are you talking about? The AR-15, there's no way to get a fully automatic weapon.
Right.
It's determined, and the media is a huge part of that. And it sucks because I don't know how or what's going to happen. You know what I mean? I don't know how we can have that conversation when you have people not knowing the terminology and thinking one way that are, one-minded in one way, and then the right as well, thinking they're just going to take all of their guns, and it's just so that's what your thing is, to focus on the actual details, have that conversation, know the terminology,
and assume goodwill on the part of the person you're talking to.
Yeah,
that you're both looking to solve a serious problem.
Yeah.
You mentioned Australia, and that's worth noting in passing.
Yes.
Of course, Australia, whenever it was 1996 thereabouts, banned. They actually more than banned, they confiscated. And I don't know if it was all firearms or long guns in particular.
Mandatory buyback.
Mandatory buyback.
Yeah.
And if you look at the numbers, what you find is in the 4 years after that, the number of gun homicides drops.
Drops?
But the number of knife homicides rises
like in England,
almost the same rate. And so all you're doing is you're back to the thing of you're switching what it is you're committing the crime with.
Yes. It's like in England, they had I think it was 33,000
knife attacks. Yeah.
And it's like you said, just like with the drug thing. The cartels, if somebody wants to do something, they will find a way to do it. Like they say, oh, well, are we going to ban cars? Because cars kill more people every year than guns or anything, really. You know?
And I think when it comes to killing other people, you're absolutely right. If I'm intent on killing somebody, you take away my gun, I'm going to find something else.
Exactly.
I'll find a way to kill the person. The place where it makes a difference, this goes back to the issue of mental health, is in suicide. Because in suicide, the gun is something with which I can kill myself quickly, definitively.
Yes.
And there's no opportunity to turn back and say, I don't think I'll do this.
Yeah.
For example, as an alternative, I'm going to lock myself with a running car in my garage.
You think about it.
I've got time to think about it. Yeah. And so from that perspective, I'll admit quite rightly that guns are a problem when combined with people who are suicidal. It makes it way too easy.
It does. You know what? You hit on a really close point, actually. I had a really good friend this year commit suicide, and I had another friend of mine, Rocco Kazaza. He's on the podcast a lot. He said, because my friend who committed suicide was a big gun person, so I thought when I heard that he killed himself that he used a gun, and I'm like, oh man, that must have been crazy, whatever. He actually hung himself. He's a 200+ pound big dude. His grandpa found him. It was very, very I couldn't even imagine. But I'm thinking a gun, like you said, is quick and over. But when you're tying up a rope,
you've got a lot of time to think about it.
That even to me is. You got a lot more going on versus oh, I had a bad week, let me just end it real quick. You know what I mean? So I don't know if how though, because I know you can't really look into someone's mental illness, right? As far as legally,
right?
I can't look into someone's if they've had mental health issues to ban them from getting guns. So how is that? How do we even?
Yeah, see, and this is exactly the conversation that the left and the right should be having.
Got it.
And it is difficult, and I don't know what the answer is, but we're never going to find the answer, if there is one, until we sit down and start having that conversation, assuming goodwill on both parts.
Of course.
If I can, I would encourage your viewers to check out my podcast with James Harrigan, Words and Numbers. You can find us at wordsandnumbers.org.
Okay, where else could they find you on social media?
Any major podcast player.
Awesome. Are you on social media, Instagram, Facebook?
Oh, yeah. We're on Facebook, Twitter. You can find me at Antony Davies, and Antony Davies on Facebook.
Thank you so much for coming
very
on
much.
and having me in your house and everything. But thank you, Anthony, for coming on. And that was another episode of E for Explicit Podcast. See you next time.
Thank you.